What does the Caribbean have to do with ice hockey? If you thought.
They're all hockey players to us, no matter what country they come from.
The National Hockey League has many problems, and one of them is cultural. How do you bring the game to more people of color? Willie was the first black professional hockey player. He hit the ice in 1958, but 45 years later, the number hasn't increased. There are only 16 black hockey players in the National Hockey League.
In 2003, 3 played for the Washington Capitals: Anson Carter, Jason Doig, and Mike Greer. Of these 3, Anson and Jason are Caribbean.
I remember growing up in Toronto, I didn't really talk hockey with my black friends. We talk hockey to a certain extent. When we get to high school, we talk basketball, we talk football and baseball. And, they weren't really trying to hear about my hockey exploits.
When you're in Boston, hockey's as big as anything there, so it's just something I enjoyed and just happened to stick with it.
My parents were both Jamaican, so you wouldn't expect, me to be in hockey. They came to Montreal, Canada to go to school, and Montreal is a mecca of hockey, really, and my dad just fell in love with the game and decided he was going to put me into hockey.
I didn't play growing up for the fame, the fortune, any of that kind of stuff. I played because I love the game, and if you truly love the game, regardless of what people say, you're going to continue playing.
Black hockey players in the National Hockey League are just starting to make noise. Jarome Iginla of the Calgary Flames is the league's first black captain, and former Edmonton goalie Grant Fuhr is the National Hockey League's first black Hall of Famer.
A lot of my friends that, are my black friends, whether they're male or female, have come to games and been totally amazed by the game because they didn't realize that guys are as athletically gifted as they are to do what we do on ice.
The progress is really slow, but overall, it's real progress. On the ice, this is Larry Sindus reporting for Carib Nation Television.
Hello, welcome to Carib Nation. I'm Doris Dean. When we think of ice hockey or the National Hockey League, most often we think of white Canadian or American men, rarely of black men, and most definitely not of men of Caribbean heritage. One person of Caribbean heritage has taken upon himself to write that history and let us know exactly what the black men of the Caribbean have contributed to the National Hockey League. Cecil Harris, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Carib Nation.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, you are a sports reporter in New York, and first let's get a foundation here and talk a little bit about how did you become interested in hockey and in covering hockey as a sports reporter, or in getting into sports reports in the first place?
Well, I grew up in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, which is a predominantly black neighborhood, and I would have to say I was a hockey fan club of one in Bed-Stuy. I was the type of boy who watched every sport on TV, and what intrigued me about hockey once I started looking at it as a 10-year-old is that not only is it a very fast sport and a very rough, violent sport, but fighting is actually an accepted part of hockey, and it was strange that I could see 2 players get into a fierce fight, but they would not be thrown out of the game. They would be sent off to the penalty box to cool off for about 5 minutes. Then they could come back and fight again, and that intrigued me. That is what kept me watching game after game, and I eventually became enamored with the skill of the players, not just the fighting aspect. But in those days, there were no black players in the NHL, so my older brother couldn't understand why I was watching it, and when I tried to talk to my friends about hockey, they would say, "Oh, that's the white man's game. Why do you watch that?" But I was intrigued by it, and once I saw a black player for the first time in 1974, Mike Marson of the Washington Capitals, who was then 19 years old, son of Jamaican immigrants who emigrated to Toronto. In fact, his family integrated the Scarborough section of Toronto. They were the first black family there. And if you were to go back to Scarborough now, it's a largely black part of Toronto, but the Morrison family was the first. And he was the first black hockey player I saw, so he was someone I could identify with. And it probably won't surprise you to know that he got into quite a bit of fights because there were racial slurs, there were catcalls, there were deliberate attempts to injure. And he intrigued me as a young boy, and I said, I always want to interview him. One day I hope to have a chance to do that. And as I got older, I found that I wanted to get into a career that would marry my love of words and love of sports, so I became a sports writer, and I was assigned to cover hockey. And once I began covering the National Hockey League full-time in 1998, I would meet the occasional black player here and there, like Anson Carter, Kevin Weekes.
Barbadian.
Both of whom are from Barbados. And they would give me that quizzical look that they were used to getting from other people, that look that says, what are you doing here?
The only black reporter. Well, why are you covering hockey? When you look back at that era, the number of Caribbean people who emigrated to Toronto especially, you cannot go to Canada and not become wrapped up with ice hockey. And I suppose those parents had no choice but to have those children play in the street with their friends and play ice hockey.
Hockey is Canada's pastime, there's no doubt. Every little Canadian boy, and now an increasing number of Canadian girls, want to play the sport. And you're quite right, a lot of them start out playing in the street. Anson Carter played what they called foot hockey. It would probably look like soccer to the uninitiated, but basically the rules of hockey, except they were all using their feet because no one could afford a stick. They couldn't afford the hockey equipment, there was no rink, so they're just playing in the street, kicking a ball around. But that's how many of them got started. And once they were able to persuade their parents to pay the money to get them into an organized program where they could play with skates and sticks and helmets and what have you, and play indoors on ice, those boys were hooked. But it's not always easy to get parents to let their children play a sport that is so foreign to them.
Well, yeah, that was the other thing that I remember talking with the parents of Kevin Weekes when he was with the North Carolina
Hurricanes, yes.
And that was one of my greatest, what was most intriguing to me was that how would a Barbadian parent even imagine to what one requires to allow your son to go playing ice hockey? First thing I think of is, of course, he's going to get hurt. Just ice skating is bad enough.
Right.
Regular skating is bad enough. And to put ice hockey, that coming from a warm country and having to deal with this ice and this padding, and it seemed a very foreign thing. But as you pointed out, in the book, when we go back, and I do want to make this point, and that is the very first black person who became eligible to be a part of the National Hockey League was of Jamaican parents.
That's correct, yes.
Tell us a little bit about his story.
Well, Herb Carnegie was the best black player never to play in the National Hockey League, but it was not because of a lack of ability. He was an outstanding player in the late 1930s through the early 1950s. But in 1939, he was playing for a team, the Toronto Junior Rangers, a top amateur team. And his coach was so proud of what Herb accomplished. A great skater. Wiggle Hips was his nickname because he had the ability to just avoid checks, check and then attempt to physically hit a player to knock him off the puck. Herb was able to avoid that. Very elusive, great skater, great passer, excellent scorer. But he was black, and the NHL, which began in 1917, was all white. So Herb's coach asked Conn Smythe, who was the powerful, influential owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, what do you think of my player? And Conn Smythe told Herb's coach, I'd pay $10,000 to any man who could turn Herb Carnegie white. His way of saying, I know he's good enough, but I don't want to be the first one to step outside the box, take a chance and sign a black player and have to bring him down with my team into, well, there were only 6 NHL teams at the time, but let's say bring him to New York and Chicago where he wouldn't be able to stay in the same hotels, would not be able to eat at the same restaurants, might not be accepted by his teammates, and I don't want to deal with any of that. So Herb did not get his chance, even when Canada entered World War II and many hockey players in the NHL traded their hockey uniforms for military garb, and thus jobs were open. Herb didn't get a call even then. And even prior to that, Herb's father, who had to take a janitorial job in Toronto, not on the same level as a job he had in his native Jamaica, told Herb and his brother Ozzie, they'll never let black boys in the NHL. And it was his father's way of trying to prepare him for not wanting to put all of his eggs in one basket, so to speak. Just don't develop tunnel vision and think it's the NHL or nothing, because if they don't allow you to play, then you won't have anything. So develop yourself academically, which Herb did, but he also had that strong dream. He wanted to be in the NHL, and the Conn Smythe quote was devastating to him. Seeing World War II come and the Canadian players leaving for the war and then not getting a call.
Still being called, yeah.
So in 1948, when the New York Rangers finally invited him to training camp, he was somewhat skeptical, but he did go to Lake Placid, New York for the camp. And in the first week, he skated alongside the other hopefuls and performed very well. In the second week, the regular Ranger players showed up, and he was in drills and practices with them each day and thought he had played well enough to make the team. But after one practice, he was called in, and an assistant coach offered him $2,700 a year, U.S., to play for their lowest level minor league team in Tacoma, Washington. Now, at the time, Herb Carnegie was making $5,100 a year playing semi-pro hockey in Canada. He was married and had 3 young children, so 5 mouths to feed, and he's being offered almost half the salary he was making in Canada. He turned it down. After practice the next day, he's called in again, and the assistant coach offers him $3,700 a year to play for their second level minor league team in St. Paul, Minnesota. Again, not close to what he's making in Canada. He turns it down. After practice the next day, he's called in again. This time it's the coach and general manager, Frank Boucher, the main man of the Rangers, who says, Herb, I like how you're playing. We want you to go to our top minor league team in New Haven, Connecticut. Well, you'll be just one step away from the NHL, and we're offering you $4,700 a year. Now, there's no excuse for the Rangers not offering him money that's comparable, if not better than, what he was making in Canada.
$400 difference. What would that have made?
It wouldn't have made any difference to the Rangers, and they would have benefited a lot more than they realized at the time, because the Rangers were not a very good team, and if they had had this man, the Jackie Robinson of hockey, if you will, it would have generated a lot more interest in the team and helped them attendance-wise, but it's as if they were blinded by their racial prejudice, not wanting to realize that signing a black player would be a public relations benefit to them. Instead, they wanted to do what athletes commonly refer to as lowballing him, offering a salary that they know is not on a level with what he should be getting. So it's a $4,700 offer. He turns that down, and Boucher is stunned. He says, Herb, don't you realize that if you sign this contract and go to our top minor league team, you'll make international headlines? And Herb looked at him and said, Mr. Boucher, my family can't eat headlines.
That's a perfect answer. When you think of the impact that things like this have had on these young players, you have to give these young West Indians credit for the fortitude, the determination, but most of all, the sense of self that allows them to withstand some of what they did and combat it with excellence, which is a hallmark, one might say, of Caribbean work ethic. In talking with these young people, as you said, you yourself are a product of Barbadian parents.
Yes.
So you can relate to that, that value system, so to speak, where we are told, do your very best.
Yes.
And that is what will win in the end. Talk a little bit about the Kevin Weekes and the Anson Carters, who became #1 goalkeepers, and some of what they faced as the first blacks in their positions.
Well, they were both subjected to racial slurs and catcalls when they began playing in junior hockey in Canada. Basically, once you progress past the schoolboy level, the top players go into junior hockey, and you're playing on travel teams, and it's really intense competition. There's nothing similar to that in the States for youth hockey, but if you're a 14, 15-year-old boy in Canada and you show some promise, those games are very intense. And there was a Christmas tournament that Anson Carter played in when he was 14, and at those tournaments, basically the fans who show up are parents and friends of the players, basically. And for whatever reason, a group of white parents showed up at this Christmas tournament with bananas to wave, to taunt Anson Carter, to try to intimidate him, get him off his game, maybe try to get him out of hockey altogether. And his parents were there and witnessed that. And when they went back home, Anson's mother sat him down and basically told him, they are jealous of you. They see in you the talent that they don't have. And you can combat that kind of racism by being even more determined to score goals. That should make you be more determined to succeed, not less. They didn't tell him, okay, we don't want you to play anymore because obviously they don't
want you to get hurt.
They said, we know how much it means to you to play hockey, and you're going to have to deal with that kind of racial prejudice by being even stronger, even tougher mentally. And Anson took that to heart. He became such a successful junior college player that he earned a full scholarship to Michigan State University and became a star there and a high draft pick in the NHL. And he is now one of the most prolific scorers in professional hockey. And I have on the cover of the book there is a picture of Anson celebrating his goal that won the gold medal for Canada in the 2003 World Championships. He's a national hero in Canada, one of the most respected players in the NHL, and now well known in Barbados too.
And very well spoken too.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
It's too bad the Washington Capitals traded him, but the Capitals have a lot of problems.
Yes. The Washington Capitals do have a lot of problems. They've been suffering for a couple of years now. Yes. So they probably needed him more than they knew then.
They certainly do.
That's for sure.
And I know you did ask about Kevin Weekes as well.
Yes, Kevin Weekes, another Barbadian.
For the Carolina Hurricanes. When he was 16 playing a tournament, a man yelled out at him a racial slur and also said, "You're taking a job away from one of our good Canadian boys." Now, Kevin, born of Asian parents, was a Canadian boy himself.
That's
born
right.
and reared in Toronto. But to this prejudiced fan, he wasn't a Canadian boy and should not have been on the ice. Kevin used those racial insults as fuel, made him even more determined to stop the puck and become a great goalie. And he's one of the best at what he does, and he wouldn't let the racial slurs stop him either. He compared it to the problems that black men had playing the quarterback position in pro football in the 90s. But after a few of them broke through, the coaches finally had to relent and say, hey, they can win games for me.
I do want to look at this whole racial issue, and when I look through the book at some of the pictures, I find that most of those blacks who were accepted, who were able to make it into the league, were blacks of lighter complexion, which tells me that still they were very reluctant to take the black guys, the dark black guys, until they had broken the ice enough with the lighter skinned guys who were a little more acceptable to the majority white population. Because you've got one of the star players right now whose parents are Nigerian, and we also have 2 Haitians.
Yeah, there are 2 Haitians in the league now, exactly. Jarome Iginla, the player on the Calgary Flames, was actually the best hockey player in the world right now.
Right, yeah.
His father
MVP,
is MVP 2 years ago, tied for the lead in goals this year, led his team to the Stanley Cup Finals this year. His father's from Nigeria. His mother is a white American, so he's very light-skinned.
Right.
And there are other players who have been in the NHL, black players who were adopted by white families, and that probably made it a bit easier for them as they came into the league. They don't have the look of, say, Anson Carter, dark, rich, dark brown skin, and in his case, dreadlocks, a very strong Afrocentric look, if you will, and that was a problem for him in Boston, and somewhat of a problem for him in Edmonton, where when he was the top scorer, it was not well publicized, but when a teammate of his became the leading scorer on the team, they put him on the giant video screen and made a big to-do that the white player Ryan Smith is now the leading scorer for the team, when Anson had been the leader for the entire year and there was no such tribute given. So that was still a problem, and to a large extent can still be a problem for the black NHL players of a darker hue, let's say.
Also, Fuhr,
Grant
who
Fuhr.
wrote the afterword to your book,
Yes.
Grant Fuhr, who also was of fairly light complexion,
Yes.
but he said that he did not experience the racism that the others experienced. And I wondered whether that was because he was adopted by two white parents
Yes.
and raised in a white world. But I also wonder how much that has to do with the fact that his statement was that Canadians don't make a big deal about race as Americans do. But I, having lived in Canada myself, find it hard to believe that one can say that, especially at that time. It must be something to do with the fact that Canadians are a little more, I find the black Canadians seem to be a little more timid, a little more tolerant
Yes.
than the black Americans towards racism.
I think that's excellent. I think it's an excellent point. I think they're more accepting of it. And I can contrast Grant Fuhr saying, oh, I didn't experience any racial prejudice, with the example of a George Laraque, whose parents emigrated to Montreal from Haiti.
Yeah.
And George Laraque was playing youth hockey and reported being called the N-word and other slurs every day and getting into fights because of it. I have to believe, even though Grant Fuhr or Jarome Iginla would say, oh, those things didn't happen. Once I dug deeper, even Jarome Iginla admitted to me about being chased back to his hotel by a group of white boys yelling, "Get him," and it was all about race, or being called the N-word by another boy on the ice. There are incidents that I think black Canadians are more willing to dismiss or de-emphasize or act as though it didn't happen.
Yes.
Whereas the Caribbean players who grow up there in Canada, like George Laraque, will say, oh, I had to fight every day because of things those people said to me, but I was determined not to let them intimidate me. I think they're more willing to fight, more willing to admit the problems that exist and confronting them directly. And I think they serve as stronger role models, quite frankly, for the young people, because it's important to let young people know the prejudice does exist.
Right.
You will be confronted by it, and here's how these professionals dealt with it to get where they are today.
Right.
You may have to face the same thing, so be prepared for it. Better to let them know the truth than to say, oh, there's nothing going on, and then have a 12-year-old boy devastated by some racial incident that he didn't expect.
Right, exactly. That raises a very interesting point. I attended a lecture by Dr. Tony Martin, a Trinidadian, on emancipation recently, and he made the point that wherever you go in the world, the people, the black people who stepped out of the box and stuck their necks out and took chances to make change happen, very often were Caribbeans or people of Caribbean descent. So there must be something about either our education system or coming out of that black experience that rather than come out of it intimidated, we seem to have come out of it a little stronger with a greater resolve to let excellence speak for itself. I remember Sidney Poitier from the Bahamas saying the same thing, that he decided no one was going to stop me from acting and doing what I want. I'll show them that I can do as well as they can.
That's right.
And I think this seems to be the mantra for most of us coming out of the Caribbean.
I agree.
Let's switch to the fighting.
Okay.
As you said, the only game in the world where one is paid to fight is in ice hockey.
That's right.
Why is it such a big thing? And I hadn't known until I read the book that many players who are not as skilled are often hired simply because they can fight.
That's a strange aspect of the NHL. It doesn't exist in every form of hockey. For example, in Olympic hockey, nobody fights because the International Olympic Committee has its own set of rules. They will kick you out of the Olympics for fighting. So nobody fights, you just play.
Right.
And those games are exciting. They're
you see the real skill.
That's where the skill comes to the forefront. The best skaters, the best shooters, the best passers, and so forth. But the NHL still clings to this notion that we might lose a significant segment of our core audience if we legislate fighting out of the sport. It's become so ingrained in the minds of a lot of hockey fans, to the point where often the most popular player on a team is not the most skilled player, but the best fighter. And when that player comes on the ice, people sit at the edge of their seats hoping he's going to take somebody on and punch somebody out. That still is a part of the NHL that is really anachronistic. If they were to get rid of it, I don't believe the sport would decline in popularity at all. In fact, it is a distant fourth in popularity in team sports in this country. I think it would enhance hockey in the United States if they do more to legislate it out of the sport and let people see the kind of hockey in the NHL that they see every 4 years in the Olympics. Nobody complains after the Olympics, hey, we didn't see any fights. Nobody ever complains about that. The highest rated hockey telecast ever in the USA was the United States versus Canada in the gold medal match in 2002, where Jarome Iginla scored 2 goals and led Canada to victory. Not one fight, but tremendous action. That's what hockey should be.
Great skill, yeah, exactly. It's a wonderful game. The skill is phenomenal. To watch these guys on the ice is something else. I want to talk about one very important aspect of what has been done by some players, and that is ice hockey in Harlem. Talk a little bit about how that came about and what it's doing for young people to try to generate interest in hockey.
That's a program that actually began in 1987. A former New York Rangers player named Pat Hickey and a local businessman, Dave Silk, got together and wanted to bring hockey to the inner city. And they wanted to make it so black kids would learn this sport and develop an appreciation for it and hopefully increase the fan base for hockey in New York, and it has done that to a large extent. It's a volunteer program for the most part. The kids just have to show up. Hockey can be a very expensive sport. A pair of skates for a boy can cost $500 a pair. But if you're in the Ice Hockey in Harlem program, all the equipment is free. The ice time is free. The hockey instruction is free. But you have to attend mandatory classes for 3 hours every week, usually from, say, 5 to 6:30, a couple of evenings a week. But if you're willing to do that, you can learn hockey, play the sport, and develop an affinity for it. And this program has been very successful for 17 years. And now there are now 36 such programs in the United States, similar to ice hockey in Harlem, where there's one here in this D.C. area, Fort DuPont hockey program, where, again, the equipment's all donated, and it will help the NHL in the long run because the league could use an African-American superstar. That's one thing it really hasn't had yet. A player born and bred in the United States
America,
who has Jarome Iginla-like skill, Wayne Gretzky-like skill. That would really help the league.
I'm sorry we're running out of time, but it's a very interesting discussion, and I wish you all the best with the book. And it's at cecilharris.com.
Yes.
Okay, well, there you have it. If you want to get a look at how the blacks broke into ice hockey, cecilharris.com. Until next time, thank you for watching. I'm Doris Dean.